I've been in my role as the online pastor for just about 10 years. And I started it right out of college. And I served on our communications team. Our church is a large church, so we have a communications team. And that wasn't something that was normal for me. I came to faith in my high school years, and I was at a small church, a church under 500 people. And I happened to know about Saddleback Church because of my pastor's book, Purpose Driven Life. I read it when I was 14 years old. And in college, I went to a Bible college in Southern California called Biola University. And I actually did my seminary work there as well at Talbot. And during my time in college, I started to intern at my church and at Saddleback Church. And I knew that Saddleback was a big church. I didn't know how big it was. But one of the things that I found out about early on was this thing that they were doing. And this was 10 years ago, where they were streaming their services online. And I started to ask questions. I was never somebody that was very technical, in the sense that I had really, my plan was early on in my story of just getting into ministry, I was going to be a youth pastor. God had really changed my life through a youth pastor that really impacted me and became like a father to me. I grew up in a home of a lot of problems, where my parents divorced when I was young, and my dad was very abusive, and my mom had a lot of drug problems. And so I was raised by my grandparents, but raised by really a tribe of people. And so I wanted to do that. Well, once I started to get into online ministry, I started to kind of see the impact. Many of the stories that I've heard on this call of, again, coming from a church of 500, I started to get emails from people all around the world. And it just was so eye-opening that you could reach anybody from anywhere. And I could have people from the Balkans to Australia to different parts of the US, and I'm emailing and talking to them. And that just kind of, to be honest, as somebody who was from California, just kind of blew my mind that God was using the internet 10 years ago. And I think this was at the early stages of the internet. We've come to call this Web 2.0. These are platforms like MySpace and Facebook. When they started to do community online, it was much more than just a static PDF information, and even early versions of it, which were message boards like Reddit and different platforms. It became more interactive. And I think as somebody who just wanted to minister to people, really my calling was to connect people to Jesus and connect them to churches. I started to just get excited about what was possible. Now, 10 years ago, the internet, as many of you know, is not what the internet is now. I mean, the example alone is this platform that we're using right now, Zoom. My church was one of the first churches to do online groups about 8 years ago. And we had to build something very custom because the tools at the time weren't super easy to use. And there were things like Skype and different things that existed, but it wasn't simple. We used something called TalkBox at the time, which was a paid for service platform. And now everybody just uses Zoom. I was just got a text from my grandma. My grandma is getting a surgery today, actually. And so I texted her this morning. I knew she was going to be up early, and I was texting her that I prayed for her this morning. Well, last week we did a Zoom call with my grandma. My grandma is in her late 80s. She would have never Zoomed, 3 months ago. And I just think about how everybody has been using Zoom and meeting and figuring out how to do these things. And I think this is a good reminder. And I was hearing the discussion happening about, what your ministry, what your church is figuring out. At the bottom line, our call is to do what God has called us to do. And for each of us, that's going to be different. Of course, we are part of God's big plan of how God's reaching people. But what's important is you're called to do certain things. Some of us are called to build kingdoms like David and Solomon. Some of us are called to be a follower and build churches like Peter and Paul. Some of us are called to be in the workplace ministry and reach people there. We all have different callings. And I bring that up because what's important is you have to determine what platforms and what places to build that ministry. We are not all called to be copycats and do the same thing. We have to figure out, and I love how Ken started this conversation off around persona, because the idea is that one of the most powerful things about the internet is that you could reach the people that you're called to reach wherever they are. For example, I might be very effective at reaching people in the US, specifically in California. I'm from Southern California. I've never lived anywhere other than Southern California. My wife is from Southern California, and our 3 kids are from Southern California. Even the way I talk, you hear it from if you've seen anything from California. I sound like a California. I like to joke that Southern Californians, we kind of all sound like we smoke marijuana because we're kind of slow in our English. We're very laid back in our English. At least that's what I've been told from people from all around the world. And so I'm called to talk to those people. The same way when Paul goes to the Jewish leaders, he cites his criteria of being schooled in that area. When Peter goes to the commonplace, he speaks in the common Greek language. We're supposed to use what God has called us to do. Our church talks about this, that we're all shaped in a very unique way, that we have different spiritual gifts, different passions, different abilities, different personalities, and different experiences. Where I might be able to reach young people that have grown up in divorce and dealt with drug issues with their parents. You're more equipped potentially to reach different people in Europe or in the Balkans or in Russia or wherever. The key is you have to figure out who God has made you to be and who you called to reach. And then that determines where to go. And this is really important, is you figure out your persona that you want, and then you pick the platforms that are best for that. So Facebook might be the platform to reach these people. Instagram might be the platform to reach these people. Don't get so hung up on pretty much where to do it. Get more focus in on how to do it, and then pick the platforms for your people. I have found doing online ministry that certain groups of people love WhatsApp, or they might, if they're in the Middle East, they might use a platform called Telegram, or they might use. I was finding out. I'm forgetting the name of the platform, but I did a conference last week, a purpose-driven conference. We did one in actually over Zoom in Russia, and for Russian pastors, and they were telling me about this meeting platform that I did not know of. You probably know of this. And I was saying Zoom, and they were bringing up this meeting platform, and I was like, I don't know about that. Where this is why technology is very much global, but it's also very regional. And I think you have to pick the platforms and the tools that make sense for you. So, and that's really important. And so this is not a copy paste type of thing. There are some platforms that are very universal, like Facebook and so forth. But what's important is that you have to establish your presence where the people you're trying to reach. And so you pick that. And so what I wanted to just share briefly about is about just this idea of online to offline. And I heard this talked about in a couple different places. And I think this is really important, is that you as a pastor and minister, you are called to reach people, but you're also called to connect them to something that is healthy. I think about as a pastor that's, only been in ministry for 10 years is, when I read the book of James, and when James says that I'm going to be held accountable as a teacher, as somebody who's in a role of authority, who's representing and shepherding people, that I have to think about what am I doing and where am I leading people. And online, one of the struggles with online is that you can reach more people in a very easy way. The struggle is going to be is that you actually have to be more deliberate in how you connect them to something that's healthy and biblical. So in our case, the way we think about online ministry is very much we are willing to go to people. We are willing to go wherever that is, whatever platform that is. But the key is that we have a strategy that connects them back to physical community long term. And that might be a year and a half long journey. And so we use this idea of online to offline very deliberately, where we'll connect them maybe from an online service where they're watching something on YouTube or on Facebook or on our website. And if you get to the end of that stream, I'll pop up or our pastor will say something and we'll say, hey, thanks for watching this week. We're so glad you're connected with us. By the way, are you interested in being prayed for or having learning more about what does it mean to follow Jesus by taking this course? Why don't you message us, or why don't you fill out this form, or why don't you text this number? And so most of our online service every week on any platform, both live and on demand, we always have a next step. And the next step of that is to drive them to something. And usually that's to a private message. I found if you get people in private messaging kind of services, either email, text, or in Facebook Messenger or whatever platform, people tend to be a little bit more honest. They tend to be a little bit more transparent and a little bit more raw. And what happens is usually that's prayer. What I have found about prayer, especially online, is most people will accept prayer. Even in a very neutral sense. A Buddhist will accept prayer. A Muslim will accept prayer. An atheist will accept prayer. They might not accept it publicly, but if you say, hey, I'm praying for you, it's a neutral thing. It will just kind of it will be like, okay, great. But it tends to be in times of transition and tension, people are open to hearing something new because they're realizing that they aren't God. And we're in a moment right now that their worldview is being shaken. And so what happens is we want to get those people to reach out to us because we don't think a lot about the tens of thousands that are watching every week, because that's great and that's awesome. And God is honoring that. So if we had, 1 million people watching something on Facebook, I actually think about how many people took a next step, how many direct messages, how many emails, and so forth. And so if we had, let's say 50,000 watch something and 1,000 take a next step, I try to figure out how do I get better at leading people to that next step afterwards? How do I become more clear at the end? How do we become more simple? And so the next step can happen. Something we've been experimenting with and have found out here in the US, we've made a shift from digital forms to texting as a next step in our services. A lot of people are more amped or more ready to take a next step that way. I think one of the reasons is a lot of people watch your services on YouTube and on your website and Facebook full screen. And so what happens is a lot of times we spend a lot of time designing a website, or we put stuff in the description or the title, and we're thinking they're going to click on that or they're going to see that. Where in honesty, they are full screen and they're fully consumed in it. And so what happens is when they're done, they don't minimize and click and read what you wrote. They close the window, or they swipe up and they close the app. And so saying stuff in the video and providing a text message number in the video is really important, or an email address. And so these are things that the more you know your persona, as Ken was talking about, the more you can adapt your call to action. And so we have to figure that out. And so we think a lot about how to move people from the service into community. And then the thought is, how do we provide more robust community experiences that are beyond just consuming content. Because I think this is something that's really important, is that your Sunday morning's service is not church. That's not what church is, right? It's not, we don't go to church just to sit and be filled. You know, the the goal here is not for us to become spiritually fat in a way. We're supposed to be lean. We're supposed to be both the hands and the feet. There's supposed to be information and transformation. This is a balance. Our faith is an active faith. It's going out and doing things. And so for us, we provide both online experiences where there's information, which there are things we believe and we want them to believe. And people do get changed by God through those experiences. But we also provide experiences where they can get their hands dirty and they can do things and they can ask questions. And so for us, there's a couple experiences. The head type of information are our weekend services, our different classes we offer on Zoom, or something called an LMS, a learning management tool, where they could take a course on Jesus or on studying the Bible or why they should trust the Bible. And those are happening. There's podcasts that they can listen to and go through something, special Facebook Live events. And then experiences are, they can serve online. They can actually serve in different ways by being a digital greeter, by praying for other people, by serving in our Facebook teams and different digital teams. They can also join our Facebook group. We have a large Facebook group for our online church where we see it very much as a digital patio. It's the back room of your church where typically people bump into each other. Here in the US, it's where the donuts are typically to eat or drink the coffee. And the idea is our Facebook group is the place where people interact. And so our Facebook group is full of people saying where they're watching from or asking for prayer, and people interact with each other. We also have online groups. I was hearing about the online groups that are getting started. Something we do is we actually host large online groups as introductory steps to our community. So what I found is a lot of people, they're not ready to start a group with their friends right away, but they will join a large Zoom call with 50 other people. And we'll say, hey, we have these large online groups. They meet for 6 weeks and just come and attend. And what I love about our online groups is our online groups are very much about information, but they're also very much about discussion. And so somebody in an online group can ask questions. Go, I heard you say, Jesus says this, but I don't believe that because my dad did this to me. A common thing that pops up is when they hear God is a loving father, but their father is unloving. And that's a hard truth to reconcile. And so small groups are a time for open conversation. And people tend to get asked questions. You also tend to find out bad theology. And that's an opportunity for the host to challenge that. We don't believe in a faith that is get in line. It's not a dictatorship. It's something that is very much we want you to open up. We want you to push back. One of my favorite verses is stories is Paul talking to the Bereans in Acts 17. And he tells the Bereans the Berean people challenge Paul and go and double check Paul's work. They double check the Old Testament and see that making sure what Paul says is right. And Paul calls the Bereans in Acts 17:11 more noble because they actually know what they believe and they're double checking. And our small group time is a time for that to happen, is for people to ask those questions. And so online groups are a really powerful way digitally. People now, especially people under 35, they don't want to just watch your service online. They actually want to experience what church is in some form online. And so that's where online groups for us are really helpful. Either you have kind of seeker-friendly type of experiences where people that are new can come in, or you might have experiences where people can open up and share, and they might be a deeper form of a Bible study. But what's important is you don't just have streaming and experiences like that. You don't just have the Facebook group. You don't just have the online group experience, but you ultimately are thinking through, how does that person connect to your physical church long term? And I say that because I believe that the physical church is never going away. People meeting face to face is not going anywhere. I mean, it hasn't ever been stopped, and it won't be stopped even in this season of COVID-19. The church is going to meet physically, and it will always meet physically. And I do think that that is the best expression of the church. God can do all sorts of things digitally, or in that case, when people can't meet in large expressions, but you still want to lead people to face-to-face type of community. And so for us, what we think through is, if somebody is a watcher of our service online, or they get into a community, the question is, where should we connect them to long term? And so that could be one of our local churches if they're in Southern California, or we have locations internationally. So if they live near our Berlin campus, or a Manila campus, or a Hong Kong, or a Buenos Aires campus, we'll connect them. And so the idea is moving a watcher into here. And we find that out through talking to them. So this is why it's really important that you have a strategy of moving people from the stream to message you. Because in messaging, we can ask, where are you? Like, in what country are you in? So of course, if they're in a country that we don't have a presence in, I know I can't connect them to our church. But if they live in California, I can ask, oh, are you near this location? And we connect them. Then if we don't have a church near them, I'll actually try to find them a church, which can be difficult. It's not easy. It's not easy always finding a church down the street, but I'll go on Google or some search tool. I'll message people from different places. I have people that reach out from all around the world. And so if somebody says, hey, I need a church in this country or that country, and if I can't find something, I'll reach out to friends. I have friends in different countries, and I'll just say, hey, how can I get somebody plugged into a church in this part of the world? And people recommend churches, and I'll plug them in. And then if there's no church, and I think that's actually one of the big dilemmas with online ministry that you'll experience, is you'll actually get people that are not near churches, and they're in places that are rural, like got mentioned in this plan of church planting. Is, what do you do with those people? What do you do with the person that doesn't have anything near them? You know, even in the US, we have over 300,000 churches, but for that can mean anything. You know, the amazing part of freedom in America is that anybody can do anything, which causes a mess. You know, democracy is both beautiful and a mess all at once. And the same thing happens with the church. Churches are all over, but a lot of them are a mess. And so for us, we've had to think through, what does it look like for that person to engage? And so what we do is we provide a strategy for them to actually start a church in their home long term, not immediately. No, you know, we're not trying to take a young believer and pushing them to plant something, but we have a strategy. And so that, what that looks like is they start watching regularly online. They take our membership class online. They start to join an online group with other people, and they start to ask these questions. And then through the process, usually about 1.5 to 2 years, they get to a point where they feel stronger, and they've been mentored, and they understand why starting something in their home is important. And then they start a small group in their home, and they start with just a couple people that they've invited. And then we start to resource them. Hey, instead of just having a conversation, why don't you put our church service on your TV and you gather together? You know, we have a training around home gathering, and we talk about this idea that the biblical word in the New Testament for church is just ecclesia. It's a word for gather. Really, the early use of that word church was not a religious word. It was a secular word. It just came through years later that these gatherings became recognizable as different. They weren't just a gathering. You know, when Paul uses, Luke uses this word gathering throughout, you know, the book of Acts, and it could be used both for a secular gathering, or it could be used for a religious gathering. And it happened to be our gatherings, as you and I know, became unique. They did certain things. They cared for each other differently. They served communion. They baptized each other. These gatherings represented people from different classes, in different colors, in different backgrounds. And so for us, we impress on them that the early church was not so different than what you're doing now. And we reference how the church in Ephesus met in a house. In Titus, they met in a house. And we say very directly, you can do church where you're at. And we actually have them sign a covenant where we can hold them accountable to certain things. And so what I want to encourage you on is start thinking through, okay, I could reach thousands and tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of people online. You can, if you have the budget, you can. There's all sorts of things you can do. The key is that don't get so wrapped up in how many people you can reach. Figure out how many people you can actually connect into community, either through an online group or through your local church, or maybe through a church planting strategy where you actually use your curriculum and you decentralize what you're doing. And that comes with you thoughtfully processing how to do these things. And so the last thing I wanted to say as my time here is coming to an end is for you to do church, the one thing I would encourage you to do, and this is really important, is I know a lot of people have embraced a streaming strategy, which is really good. And I think is tremendous. But it's important for you to know is the streaming of your service is the front door. It's the front door to what your church is doing. And I'm going to encourage you is to build the rest of the house. Okay, build the rest of the church. So streaming on Facebook, on YouTube, or however you're doing it, it's an amazing opportunity. But church is so much more than just that service. So start thinking through, okay, what does a robust online group strategy look like for your church? What does a robust serving strategy look for your church online? What does a robust discipleship strategy look like? What does a robust evangelism strategy look like? And start to build the rest of the house. And so for us, that looks like, we talk about it as 4 pillars for online church to be church. There is the large gatherings that happen. These are the corporate gatherings. These are the, Acts 4 temple courts gatherings, or the large houses that they were meeting in early on. And so doing Facebook, YouTube type of experiences. Then you need the medium and small gatherings. These are the things happening on Zoom or Facebook Messenger or whatever platform where you get more, you think less about views and you think more about how many faces you see on the call. Is that you and I need to get in front of other people. And so think about, okay, on the weekend, you're doing this large gathering, but during the week, think more about how many faces can I see on Zoom in a given week? Or how many faces can I see on Skype or whatever platform? And so if you're doing large gatherings, small and medium gatherings, again, these are the house-to-house type of connections, is where you're actually doing life with other people. And then you need to be doing one-on-one connections. You and your key leaders need to be doing it, because pre-COVID, mentorship was already happening. It was already happening. And so during COVID and post-COVID, you need to continue on. And that usually means teaching your team how to use the tools, doing the work. And so to encourage mentorship to continue on, or just phone calls, or whatever it looks like, people need to connect. And then lastly, you need to encourage self-guided type of tools. These are the podcasts, the devotionals, the resources they're going. And so if you're doing large gatherings, medium and small gatherings, one-on-one connections, and self-guided, if all those things are happening online, that starts to be the fullest expression of what church is. And so be thinking through about who you're reaching. Be thinking through, how do I connect a watcher into your physical community, either your church, a partner church, or helping them start a church, and be thinking through these 4 pillars of building something beyond streaming, not just the front door, but the rest of the house. And that starts with doing large, small, one-on-one connections and self-guided, and doing those all together. And if you start doing that all together, it's almost like it's like baking a cake, is that if you have one of these elements, if you don't include the yeast in a cake, it's not going to be that good. If you're not going to include the sugar, it's not going to taste good. But it's all together. If you bake this together, it's gonna be delicious. And with your online church strategy, you need all these things to continue on. So I would love to answer any questions or continue on, but thank you for letting me share this morning.